He stayed up to catch a thief, but found a shackled girl in the dark. They say the West was made to swallow the weak whole, but sometimes it keeps a dark little corner just for the ones too stubborn or too bitter to die. Dead Hollow was one of those corners. There wasn't a church without a locked door, a house without a gun, or a soul that didn't carry at least one scar buried beneath calloused skin. Elijah Cross lived on the southern edge of town, where the map ended and the shadows began. He had a crooked roof over his head, 3 hens too old to lay, and a rifle hanging above the hearth like a sacred relic. His wife had died the year the drought hit. His kid left before they even lost their baby teeth. And Elijah stayed, like a gnarled stump that couldn't quite live, but hadn't learned how to die either. It started on a Wednesday morning when he opened the coop and found every egg gone. No broken shells, no fox tracks, just straw, disturbed, like someone with hands had been there, someone with intent. He didn't curse, just scratched his beard and muttered, "Chickens don't lie, but the folks in this town could outpreach a damn pastor." Next morning, 2 more eggs gone. This time there were footprints, small, bare, like a ghost had walked through, but Elijah didn't believe in ghosts, only empty stomachs and guilty hands. So Friday night he waited. No lantern, no torch, just the dark and the reek of chicken shit baking under a sun-hot day. His fingers gripped the stock of his rifle, eyes locked on the coop's slats, like justice for the whole damn town sat square on his hunchbacked shoulders. Elijah wasn't the type to believe in luck, but old habits die hard, and he found himself whispering a verse anyway. "The righteous do not steal from others." Still, deep down, he was ready to teach someone a lesson, with the butt of his gun if it came to that. Maybe he didn't have a wife to cook for, or a kid left to scold, but if anyone thought they could sneak onto Elijah Cross's land, steal his eggs, and walk away clean, they didn't know the price of an egg in Dead Hollow. A whisper in the dark could be the wind, or someone not quite dead, looking to crawl back to life through a stolen meal. And then, as moonlight sliced across the roof of the coop, Elijah heard it, the faintest rustle of straw, so soft it made the hair on his neck rise. He didn't need to see clearly to know someone was kneeling beneath him, hand groping under a chicken's belly. He stood, no warning, no light, and in a blink his hand clamped down on a wrist, cold, thin, trembling. But Elijah didn't know yet. What quivered under his grip wasn't a thief. It was a curse trying to survive, wrapped in the skin of something human. Elijah Cross wasn't a man who startled easy. In Dead Hollow, where a promise was cheaper than a bullet, being surprised usually meant dying early. But that night, when his hand clamped down on a wrist no bigger than a chicken bone and cold as well water in December, he knew right away this wasn't a fox. And sure as hell, not some brat looking for kicks. Moonlight slipped through the slats and spilled across a scrawny figure, dressed in a torn, homespun dress that barely reached her knees, hair matted like scorched grass, and a back hunched not from age, but from too many blows and not enough hugs. She didn't fight, didn't scream, just bowed her head, still as a stone, like she'd been waiting for this moment a long, long time. Elijah froze for a beat, rifle still hanging heavy by his hip. And what he felt first wasn't anger, wasn't pity either. It was that cold, annoyed kind of frustration you get when you think you're about to lay down the law and end up staring at a goddamn riddle instead. "Stand up," he growled, gripping her thin arm tight. No resistance. Even her trembling felt like habit, not fear. He hauled her out of the coop. Under the flickering glow of the oil lamp, her face came into view, filthy, eyes swollen, lips cracked like old paint. But it wasn't her face that made Elijah pause. It was her bare feet dragging in the dirt, and the dried blood crusted around her ankles. He scowled, flicked her skirt up a few inches, half expecting to find stolen goods tucked away. What he found instead stopped him cold. A rusted iron shackle clamped around her ankle so tight it had grown into her skin, like it belonged there. Elijah didn't say a word, not out of fear, but because in 42 years of surviving this God-forsaken land, he'd never seen a shackle on a person that looked more like a muzzle than a manacle. He let her skirt fall. Her eyes stayed on the dirt, like silence was the last piece of armor she had left. No begging, no explanation. Just that deadened kind of stillness. The kind you only see in folks who've been sold too many times to believe they're worth buying. Elijah didn't bother asking her name, because a thing you're not allowed to name ain't got a name to begin with. He called her the mute, or, on rougher days, that ragged thing. But that ragged thing just stood there, feet caked in dust, arms clutching a cloth sack of eggs she hadn't even eaten yet, eggs she might have risked her life to steal just for a few more days of not dying. Elijah glanced at the hens, still asleep, dumb as ever, but even dumb chickens don't wear chains. He took a step back, something in his eyes shifting, no longer the hunter, not quite the savior either, just a man who'd cracked open the lid of a well he wasn't sure had a bottom. And deep in his gut, like a thorn under a fingernail, came a prickling thought. If that shackle's real, then who put it on her? And what the hell were they trying to keep locked up? Elijah didn't ask her name, didn't ask why a girl so small wore a shackle on her ankle like some yard animal tied out for the night. What would be the point? In Dead Hollow, asking about someone's past was like asking the wind where it came from. No one ever answered. And if they did, it sure as hell wasn't the truth. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of dry biscuit, the kind even a stray dog had to chew twice before it dared swallow. He tossed it to her. She caught it, not with her hands, with her eyes, the kind of eyes that knew anything thrown your way could be snatched back just as fast. She ate, not greedy, not cautious, not even curious. She just ate, like someone who'd spent a lifetime choking down other people's sins. Elijah planted his hands on his hips, watching her through the soft flicker of the oil lamp. He didn't feel fear, didn't feel pity, just tangled, like he'd caught a bird that didn't belong anywhere and couldn't figure whether to cage it or let it get even more lost. "Tomorrow morning I'm taking you to the station," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Let someone in a damn uniform sort it out. And maybe he would have, really, if he'd known less. But that was the trouble with Elijah Cross. He knew too damn much, not from books, not from gossip, from life. The kind of knowing that comes from reading silence like a bloodstain under a rug. If Elijah had known that girl had been locked in the basement of Sacred Heart Church for 47 days cess, no light, just the sound of sermons tangled with sobbing and the crack of a whip, then maybe, just maybe, he'd have boiled water instead of boiling over. But Elijah didn't know. Not yet. Not fully. All he felt was the itch, that gnawing itch of something that didn't make sense, like how a hungry thief is usually frantic, but she wasn't, or how someone in shackles must belong to somebody. But she didn't mention a soul, and most of all, the way she looked at the fire in the hearth, like she had once watched it burn the spirit right out of someone she knew. "Who are you running from?" Elijah blurted out. She didn't answer, just tilted her head slightly, like she was trying to hear him better, or like she'd already heard that question so many times it barely registered anymore. He exhaled, sat down in the rickety wooden chair, just an arm's length away. The night dragged on, thick and slow. The wind brought the smell of damp grass and old ash. She nodded off, head drooping, arms still wrapped around that threadbare sack of eggs. Elijah stayed quiet, not out of kindness, but because something in her told him not to wake her. Not the sleep, but the story she was holding down with every breath. And he knew, from the way her head bowed, from the shackle still locked around her ankle, from the way this whole town had learned to go quiet when screams didn't match the choir, that she didn't come here to steal. She came here to survive. In Dead Hollow, the things folks didn't know got made up to fill the gaps, and the things they knew too well, those got buried, like dog bones beneath the corn dust. So, the next morning, when the strange girl hadn't left Elijah's ranch, The rumors slithered out of old women's mouths like snakes after a rainstorm. They said Elijah Cross was keeping a girl, that she was some lost whore who stumbled onto his land and traded what was under her skirt for a roof over her head. One man even bet Elijah was trading eggs for flesh, 'cause his hens had started laying again after days of nothing. But while the townsfolk sharpened their tongues and stirred their coffee with scandal, out back, in the old empty horse stable, a girl sat hunched over, hands trembling, drawing from memory a map of a place no one wanted to talk about. The basement of Sacred Heart Church, a place that once preached, God loves even the orphans, but locked its doors at night so those same orphans stopped dreaming of heaven altogether. She sat beside a rotting wall, her face close to a flickering oil lamp, etching tiny boxes into the wooden plank with a rusted nail. In her left hand she held a strip of bloody cloth, her own blood still seeping from the wound the shackle had left, as if pain needed a purpose to justify sticking around. She didn't cry, didn't curse, didn't pray. She just carved. Each stroke like a silent confession, each square a room, each cut a truth no one had dared speak out loud. After the seventh square, the smallest, deepest room, the one she'd been locked in the longest, she scratched in 3 letters. GTR, no notes, no markings, no explanations. Just GTR. 3 letters caked in mud and memory. An outsider might think it was her initials, or a lover's, or nothing at all. Elijah, still out on the porch, didn't notice anything strange just yet. All he knew was that she hadn't run off, hadn't asked for more food, just sat there all morning like she was whispering with ghosts, and none of them were friendly. That afternoon, he stepped into the stable, looking for an old shovel, brushed a hand along the wall, and felt the cold bite of metal, a rusted nail jammed between 2 boards. Beside it, faint markings, like a crude little map. But Elijah didn't read the letters. Not yet. Because if he had, maybe this whole story would have ended a lot sooner. But like all things in Dead Hollow, the truth stays quiet until someone stubborn enough decides to listen. That afternoon, the sky was quiet in a way that made Elijah uneasy. No wind, no birds, just the dry groan of wood stretching under the sun, like even the house was holding its breath. Elijah sat on the porch, apple knife in hand, though he hadn't peeled a thing. There was something in the air that wouldn't let him settle. Not the kind of silence that meant peace, but the kind that meant something was crouching in the tall grass, waiting for the signal to pounce. Then came the hoofbeats, slow, heavy, like nails being hammered into the earth. 3 horses, 3 men. But not the kind who came for eggs. The one in front wore a long black coat that dusted the ground as he rode, his fedora tilted low enough to shadow half his face. He looked more like a priest than the painting of a priest hanging in the church. His face was too clean, his smile too soft. And his eyes were limestone, cold and chalky. Father Gareth, the man they praised as the savior of orphaned souls, though no one ever asked where those souls went after they were saved. The 2 men flanking him wore black vests and silver sheriff's stars, stamped with the name Dead Hollow. They didn't speak, just stared at Elijah like he was a rock in the road. Not worth hating, but in the damn way, nonetheless. Gareth dismounted, adjusted his sleeves like a man prepping for a sermon. Then he spoke, voice smooth as altar wine, practiced from too many Sundays at the pulpit. "Mr. Cross, I understand you're harboring a girl who does not belong here. She is property of Sacred Heart Church, a lost lamb from the holy refuge we provide for misguided souls. You should return her." That last sentence came out soft, like a suggestion, but it stung like rotting wood soaked in snake liquor. Elijah rose slowly, knife still in hand. He wasn't used to speaking with men who used words like holy to mask the stench of dried blood and old tears. But before he could say a thing, the door behind him creaked open. She stepped out, slowly, like every step was a face-off with something from a nightmare. No coat, no shoes, just the old iron shackle in her hand, held like a black flag dripping with blood. She lifted it. Sunlight sliced across her eyes, but she didn't blink. "I didn't steal your eggs," she said, her voice calm, like naming ingredients in a stew. "I brought evidence." No one moved. Elijah hadn't known she'd come out, hadn't expected her to speak, but something in his chest sank, like someone just rang a bell he'd forgotten he ever hung. Gareth tilted his head. His smile stayed, but his eyes darkened a shade. "My child," he said, "you've been misled. They are using you." She didn't answer. She just looked at him. Really looked. Like it was the first time someone from the pews dared look back at the man behind the pulpit. The two deputies tensed, hands inching toward their guns. Elijah stepped forward, placed himself between her and the porch steps. "I don't know what goes on in your church," he said, "but I do know this. In this house, we don't chain people up to teach them about love." The wind came back, carrying with it dust, the smell of iron, and something ancient and heavy, rising up from deep beneath the soil. The air had thickened, like pond sludge stirred after years of silence. No breeze, no chickens crowed. The entire ranch sat beneath a silence dense as cloth-wrapped steel. She still stood there, shackle in hand, eyes locked on the man who once preached about redemption and holy refuge. But this time, it wasn't just her stare. This time, she brought something else. Something you couldn't deny, couldn't pray into disappearing. From the hem of her torn dress, she pulled a crumpled piece of paper, folded in quarters, so wrinkled it looked worthless. But the moment she unfolded it, a breeze kicked up, soft, just enough to lift a corner, as if God himself wanted a look. She handed it to Elijah. No explanation, just that quiet, certain gesture. He took it, hands trembling, not from age, from instinct. Something deep in his bones told him this was the kind of thing that flipped cast-iron towns like Dead Hollow upside down. On the page were 7 names, no last names, just the simple, familiar names of 7 little girls, each one marked with a date. Below them, a hand-drawn map of a basement, tiny rooms, thick wooden doors, each stair and corner sketched in grim, careful detail. In the margin, a separate note written in a sharper adult hand. Modifications per GTR's request. Elijah didn't ask who GTR was. He didn't need to, because when he turned to Gareth, it was slow, the way a man might turn to say goodbye, not to a person, but to a mask. Gareth's eyes changed. Gone was the warm smile. Gone were the fake crow's feet at the corners. What remained was raw, cold, metal under moonlight. He stepped forward and opened his mouth, but she beat him to it. "Those were my sisters," she said. "Not by blood, by cell. I remember every cry, every damp wall. I'm the only one who made it out." Elijah clenched the paper tighter in his hand. He wasn't a sheriff, wasn't a judge, but there are moments when a man doesn't need a title to stand on the side of what's right. Behind Gareth, the 2 deputies shifted. One glanced at the diagram. His expression flickered, from doubt to dread to a practiced kind of cluelessness. Gareth didn't move, but his fist clenched, like he wanted to crush the Bible in his coat pocket into ash. "You're confused. You've been hurt. You imagined this." "No," she cut him off. "I remember, and I lived to tell it." A heartbeat's pause. Gareth lived off sermons about mercy, while hiding sin in every brick of that church. And now one of those bricks has come loose, dripping blood and able to speak. Elijah didn't say a word. He just folded the paper once and tucked it into the pocket closest to his heart. And the whole ranch held still. Like it, too, was waiting to see where Judgment Day would begin. No one could say for sure who drew first. All they knew was, the moment the girl finished saying, "I lived to tell it," the 2 mounted deputies stopped pretending to be statues. The one on the left, middle-aged, barrel-bellied, drew his Colt .45 from the holster like he'd rehearsed it 100 times in front of a mirror. The younger one, eyes that couldn't meet anyone's gaze, gripped his gun like it was supposed to replace courage. They didn't ask, didn't warn, just raised their barrels, aimed straight at Elijah and the girl. "You're obstructing justice," the big one barked, voice dry and brittle as fire pit ash. Elijah didn't flinch, not because he wasn't scared, but because he'd smelled the stench of betrayal before, especially the kind that wore a badge. Before the war, Elijah had been a cavalry lieutenant, survived 3 winters in Colorado, where trenches were dug with bare hands and comrades buried with dull axes. He'd looked men in the eyes as they pulled triggers for orders, not for justice. This was no different. Except now he was standing in his own yard, in front of a girl who had only just learned to breathe again after living like a ghost, and there were 2 guns aimed at sending her back to silence. So he moved. Fast, so fast his shadow couldn't keep up. One sidestep left, drove his elbow into the younger man's barrel, kicked hard at the knee, gun dropped. Other hand swung the apple knife, sliced the older deputy's forearm. Not deep, but deep enough to make him scream and recoil. Both men hit the dirt like busted sacks of flour. The Colt rolled away. Elijah stood over them, back bent by years, but eyes steady as a desert spear. Father Gareth didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. He knew guns don't kill memory, and sins don't bleed so easily. But now, he stood alone. No deputies, no badge, no pulpit, just Elijah's stare, and hers. 2 mirrors, both showing the same reflection, the truth behind the cloth. "We will return," Gareth hissed, each word like a blunt blade. Elijah nodded. "I won't lock the door," he said, "but next time bring a judge, not a couple of muzzled dogs." No one laughed. The girl tightened her grip on the paper. The shackle still lay on the ground, a reminder that some things have no place coming back. The 3 men rode off, gruff and graceless, like buzzards chased from a carcass. All that remained was the red dust, a few drops of blood, and a silence that this time didn't belong to fear, but to justice, finally waking up. No one saw them off. No one needed to. One early morning near the end of the month, Elijah shut the chicken coop, slid the apple knife into his coat pocket, and led out the old horse he once almost sold, now getting a second chance to carry someone who deserved to be taken somewhere that mattered. The girl sat behind the saddle, silent, arms wrapped tight around the same cloth sack that once held eggs, now carrying a crumpled piece of paper, a sketch of a basement, and 7 names that too many had tried to forget. The nearest city was 3 days' ride from Dead Hollow. Elijah didn't rush. At every meal along the way, he gave her the bigger share, not out of pity, but because he understood. Some hungers don't live in the gut. They grow in the space where your voice used to be, before someone took it from you. When they reached the federal courthouse, they didn't shout. They didn't beg. They just handed over what she'd carried with her all this time. The drawing, the rusted shackle, the initials GTR, and a hand-copied letter, written by a girl who'd gone missing 3 years earlier, reproduced from memory, word for word, stroke for stroke. The officials read, they checked, and then they believed. A few weeks later, a federal investigation was launched, and like any storm that's headed the right way, it didn't need thunder to tear the roof off what had been called organized mercy. Gareth vanished from Dead Hollow before the warrant arrived, but a warrant wasn't the only thing chasing him. There were stories, there were maps, there were scars, and above all, there was one girl who lived. Elijah didn't attend the hearing. He went back to his old home, the coop still standing, the rifle still hanging above the hearth. But for the first time in years, silence didn't feel like a sentence. That old man used to live with silence like it was punishment. But now, he lived with it like it was a reward. A week later, on a moonless night, the girl returned to Sacred Heart Church. Now just a husk of a building. Broken tiles, sagging wood. No guards, no watchers. Just her, and a single candle. She placed it at the foot of the church door. No bowing, no prayers. She stood upright, the wind moving through her hair like even time had paused to listen. On the stone wall beside the doorway, a message was carved, slanted and rough, etched with Elijah's old knife. But it rang clear as a midday bell. God sees all, but this time we acted on his behalf. She didn't cry, didn't have to, because sometimes the strongest thing isn't surviving. It's daring to say the truth that others spent their lives pretending didn't exist. If that last story touched something inside you, then let the next one take you even deeper, to an ending you won't forget anytime soon. Click the video on the screen.